Democratic nominating process where the voters spoke clearly. I won 14 million of those votes, et cetera. So I just want, I not only believe that from the beginning, but I wanted to reassert it and demonstrate that it's true. And I'm going to be doing that all through this week and from here on.
That's right. We're going to respect the will of the voters all the way through this election. I'm not changing my mind. I'm firm on this thing. Funny, because last night in a hostage video recorded inside of the White House at the Resolute desk, Joe Biden announced the following. He said, you know what? It's time to go.
When you elected me to this office, I promised to always level with you, to tell you the truth.
How's that going?
And the truth. The sacred cause of this country is larger than any one of us. And those of us who cherish that cause cherish it so much. A cause of American democracy itself.
Oh, my.
Must unite to protect it. You know, in recent weeks, it's become clear to me that I need to unite my party in this critical endeavor. I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world,
I thought they voted for you.
my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward.
Biden, he says he's a threat to democracy. What a world. He was defending it. Now he's a threat to it. Chris Bedford joins us now as senior politics editor and D.C. correspondent for The Blaze. Chris, great to have you with us, sir.
Good to be here.
And I should point out also, what's the name of your show over on The Blaze?
Blaze News Tonight. We're on every weeknight on X and YouTube and Blaze TV.
Blaze News Tonight. The Blaze has become even better with Chris Bedford being a part of it. So what do you make of Joe Biden's hostage video last night?
Well, you know, the first thing that came to my mind, and I muttered this to Sarah, we were watching it after recording, was how sick I am of John Meacham. That's the Biden speechwriter, basically. He's the historian, your dad or grandparents, maybe you have some of his books on your bookshelf. And he has gotten so unbelievably annoying and cliche. It's not said enough that John Meacham, with his Trump dementia syndrome, has just become a bad writer, always prattling on about saving democracy in the darkest days. It's really the only tools he has.
Yeah, he's the Kamala Harris of Aaron Sorkin's. He's like, he's awful. He's just awful.
He sounds like, he reminds me of a lot of the kids I went to college with who would just binge watch Aaron Sorkin's West Wing.
Right.
And would give these just pronouncements. It's like, we're at a higher level than this right now. But the second thing I thought was how much gaunter he looked, Joe Biden, than just 10 days before. His shoulders weren't as high. He just looked weak, and he was muttering. And then the third thing I thought, kind of reviewing the whole thing, was, listen, for the Acela corridor people and the Democrats who just say, well, look, we got a new candidate now because Joe Biden, who was selected by the voters, can't win. So we're not going to go with him anymore. We got a new one. They might be satisfied. But if you're just a normal person who goes to work and expects honesty from your political parties and expects to be a part of this process, and you hear that speech, you might have noticed that there's not a single ounce of explanation for why Joe Biden is not running again.
None.
It was, look at all the great things I've accomplished. Look at what a wonderful president I am. And now I'm going to pass the torch 100 days before the election? That doesn't cut.
The White House is claiming this week, Coringe was claiming yesterday that he's not leaving because of his health. That's not why he's leaving. And that's the reason they say that is because they need to explain why he's staying in office until the inauguration of the next president. And which is interesting to hear them say because that's quite obviously the basis by which Democrats claim they needed to get rid of him. He alluded to the division within his own party. That division was the product of his failing health, at least according to their explanations.
Yeah, and as you saw that in the Oval Office today when he showed up for 90 seconds to talk with Netanyahu before they kicked reporters out. And when the Daily Caller's Reagan Reese shouted out, "Are you resigning because of your health?" He looked at her and shook his head. Well, what other reason could it possibly be other than being strong-armed? I mean, it's clear that he was strong-armed. It was clear that he was strong-armed in his home while he was ill and while he was weak by people who were saying he's too ill and weak to run for president. So maybe it's difficult to argue against them when you can barely lift your head.
Right. That's true. But you and I both know that in the end, fundamentally, it wasn't actually his health that led to his resignation, his being forced out. It was his poll standing. It was his numbers. If Joe Biden were polling ahead of Donald Trump and yet just as demented, they would not be taking him out of office right now.
No, we'd not be having any of these conversations. They wouldn't have done any of these things. He was polling very poorly badly going into the debate. But after the debate, the numbers really started to pull apart, and the Democrat poobahs just felt like they couldn't hide anymore. The problem, they're not concerned for Joe Biden's health. They're not concerned for the effects of stress on someone who's already experiencing the impacts of aging. What they're concerned about solely is beating Donald Trump. And you saw them get really depressed for a little while when they were convinced, oh my gosh, it's all over. What are we going to do? And then they finally came around through the stages of grief, to, well, it has to be Kamala Harris. We have the campaign operation already in place. She's the vice president. It makes sense. The money gets to transfer over legally and easily without a huge fight from the Republicans. This is the way to go. And as soon as it happened, just the corporations, the big Democratic donors, just unleashed an historic amount of money. And the Democrats went from so depressed to so energized, and so happy. And Joe Biden just got pushed by the side 2 weeks to even give a speech explaining it for a couple of days. And when he didn't explain anything.
No, he didn't explain a thing. I saw Tucker Carlson had an interview today with Dr. Ben Carson, and very quickly in the interview, they get to this point. Ben Carson, a smart, brilliant guy, he pointed out, he's like, this is a huge test for the media and whether or not it has the ability to convince the public that Kamala Harris is in any way a good candidate. That this is at its core, what this is a test of the media's ability to rig our elections. Will they be able to successfully do it this year? They're moving quickly, Chris Bedford. What do you think the chances are?
I think they're decent. They're working really hard at this. I mean, this is one of the reasons that they were so adamant about not losing control over Twitter. It's because Twitter would have played a major part in this, in which things were trending and which articles were pushed down, and now it's a free space. But they still have things like TikTok. The Chinese government controls it, but they're not interested in Donald Trump being around. So you suddenly have all this stuff coming out about how cool Kamala Harris is. No one believes she's cool. If there was an ounce of cool in Kamala Harris, then this administration, which is obsessed with identity politics, would have put her out front and center. But she has been hidden for 4 years because of how bad and cringy and Hillary-esque a politician she actually is. And then you've got the CNN folks talking about it. And at the same time, you've got the Axios and everyone else coming out and condemning anyone who pointed out that Kamala Harris was in charge of the border. She was never the border czar. But then when it turned out that Axios itself had talked about how she was the border czar, as opposed to going back and saying, you're right, that was unfair, they said their old reporting was wrong. Now, of course, she didn't officially have the title, but she is the highest-ranking official in the U.S. government who was charged with overseeing the border. It makes sense. And they'll try to memory hold that. They'll try to memory hold the whole thing and do it with a straight face, too. It's wild.
Yes. No, that's totally right. And I was pointing out earlier, remember back in 2009, Chris, that Van Jones was called the Green Job Czar when he worked for Barack Obama. And his title was some ludicrously long official title that wasn't Green Job Czar. So in other words, he wasn't the Green Job Czar. Well, yeah, he was. That's literally the entire media referred to him that way, including, and they did the same thing with Kamala Harris. And on this issue of the border, had Kamala been successful, and of course, really, the Biden administration had no intention of fixing the border problem. Their problem was a PR problem. They wanted people to stop paying attention to it. That's what they were really trying to do. But had she, in some alternate universe, solved the border problem, they'd be crowing today that she was the border czar, Chris. That what a great success she was because she was the border czar.
Yeah, they would. They're going to try and change every aspect of her record. They're going to try and ignore and pretend the things that are awful, which is most of it, didn't happen. I mean, I think you saw the online rankings of the most liberal senator that she had won in 2019
yes.
were deleted.
GovTrack.
They're going to try and pretend that. None of this ever happened, and the accomplishments she has are going to completely exaggerate. If you look at her accomplishments, if you dig through the legislation she actually worked on in her years in the Senate, it's just a bunch of DEI and gender garbage and messaging bills. It's nothing that she could really actually brag about. Nothing that's really made an impact. Nothing really bipartisan. That's who she's always been. That's who she was for. Oh, and by the way, remember when Joe Biden said, "I'm going to pick a vice president who is a black female"? That was the criteria.
Yes.
And then they finally settled on Kamala Harris. Like he said this in interviews. He said it in speeches. Well, now to point that out is racist. So Republicans who pointed that out, they're just the worst people in the world. And these are the sorts of things that Republicans are going to have to face as they work hard to define Kamala Harris, and the media works hard on the other end to define her as some kind of cool, great, and important and seismic shifting politician.
Yeah, no, they're going full North Korean right now, and you just have to be able to identify that and confront it. Chris Bedford, thank you as always over at the Blaze, sir. Good to talk to you today.
Great to be here, Vince.
It's the great Chris Bedford. The effort to reinvent Kamala is great. Also, she is a full-blown radical. Just to remind you, she's a commie. Her views. Biden is an empty vessel for sure. There's constant image, realignment, like reinvention for Kamala, no question. But insofar as you can stitch together any sort of ideological consistency, she falls for every element of the Marxist claptrap. Always. Like the equity stuff. She's all in on equity. And she even says, when she's had a chance to talk about what equity is, she doesn't pretend it's the same thing as equality. Or at least she hasn't in the past. She says it's different. Equality and equity are totally different. Equality is when people are treated equally. Equity is when we steal someone's stuff and give it to somebody else.
Equality suggests often everybody should get the same thing.
No.
Well, that often assumes everybody starts.
No, nobody ever says that. To treat people equally is not to say that everybody gets the same thing. See, the left does not view individuals as having inherent value. That's why they had to create this different word, equity. Whereas people who recognize equality among people, what they recognize is that we all have inherent value, that we've been created in the image of God, and that you shouldn't treat people differently just because they look different or have some sort of immutable characteristic. You shouldn't be prejudiced against them. That's equality. Equity is when you define everything based on resources, consumption. What do we take from one person and give to another? That's the left. That's Marxism.
Equality suggests often everybody should get the same thing. Well, that often assumes everybody started out in the same place, as opposed to equity, which is everyone should end up in the same place.
That's literally communism.
And if you then understand not everybody started out in the same place, you understand some people need more.
How do those experiments go? How do those communist experiments go? So you say, okay, let's concentrate. Everyone open up your wallets. Let's throw all the money in the middle of the table. I'll make sure that I hand it out equitably to everyone, right? We'll just start distributing this cash. How do those systems of government go? Oh, well, they end in bloodshed and corruption and theft, and the people who control the purse are like, it's like you're operating the monopoly money in a game of Monopoly. Somehow, how does the banker so filthy rich? Communism. It's always, they've been pocketing the hundreds. This is how it always goes. And this is what Bernie Sanders and company want. They want these, they pretend like they actually want to take on concentrations of power. We want to stop these corporations. And instead, what they want to do is concentrate power into their own hands. They want to consolidate it even further into just one power center, not these diffuse power centers, but instead to one inevitably corrupt power center. And that leads to human suffering. You do not want that. You do not want that. But if you're blind to history, you'll fall for it. Let's take a phone call. Tom in Annandale, line 6. Tom, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Good afternoon, Vince. You're the best. Hey, this thing about the rioting and the desecration of the
monuments out in front of Union Station.
Yeah, this could be solved so quickly, but the problem is the Justice Department and the District of Columbia. And here's what I'm telling you. January 6th, those people had to make restitution for the damage that they were videotaped doing.
Uh-huh.
If they just picked the first 5 or 10 or 15 people, didn't say a word, just put the cuffs on them, took them away, videotaped what they did, and charged them for it. Because they would either go to jail and made them pay for the damage. This would be solved in a minute.
Let me do you one better. I agree with you on the money. I just got a message from Patty, who messaged in on the same topic. She said they should have to clean it. They should have to clean it.
But you can't do that.
Why?
I don't think you can do that. But you certainly could.
Well, wait a second. If there's some sort of law that gets in the way, we've got to change that law. Because here's the thing. The New York City mayor, Rudy Giuliani, did this. Rudy Giuliani did this back in the 90s. They had a graffiti problem in New York City. He said, you know what I'm going to do now? The punishment is you got to get your ass back on the street and you clean it up. You clean it up and you do it. That's the walk of shame.
And they won't do it. Vince, they won't do it. It's the District of Columbia.
I know, but they should. I mean, if you're talking about charging them for it, let's take it to the next step. Make them clean it and then put a camera in their face. How do you feel, stupid? How do you feel? Broadcast it everywhere. Let people know there are consequences for this. That's how you get things back on track. Let people know there are consequences. Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 4:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Derek Anderson's with us from Virginia's 7th Congressional District. He's a former Green Beret. We've got a lot to discuss. I want to talk to him about all that crime in the nation's capital, violence, squalor, all brought to us by the left. Derek has a response to that. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. A couple of things I want to get to here. One of them is that the left, you know, when it comes to Donald Trump, what else could be said about President Trump? What could they possibly throw at this guy that they haven't already thrown at him? In terms of political figures, he is the most well-known, the most battle-tested, the most well-defined of any candidate that any of us will ever see. They've thrown so many lies at this guy. They've thrown so many attacks in every possible forum, the media, the courts. So they're always looking for something new, though. And so never underestimate the ability of the left to invent a new line of attack. Oh, and Trump eats babies. Oh, now you're for protecting babies? Like, you know, come on. It'll be... Never underestimate them on this. But for the moment, they are setting their sights instead on, as you do in a political campaign, on President Trump's running mate, Senator JD Vance. Now, JD Vance has a pretty well-documented biography. Hillbilly Elegy is his story. It was turned into a Hollywood movie. He's about as well-known of a political candidate in terms of his backstory as you can possibly get. He's got an impressive background, kind of an amazing story, actually. Growing up in poverty and going to elite schools and becoming a United States Marine, and then in the end, of course, becoming a United States Senator and now joining the ticket alongside Donald Trump to possibly become the Vice President of the United States. An amazing, amazing American story. And so the left is trying to hurt him right now. They are digging through everything he's ever done and then trying to tell you that this little clip that we're sharing with you either represents his views in total or that he is a scumbag for having them. They're great moral judges of moral character, obviously, the left. So let me begin with some of the clips that are going around now from JD Vance. First and foremost, this is one from a couple years ago when Tucker Carlson had his Fox News show. JD Vance was on the air, and he was talking about how there are too many childless cat ladies who are controlling our future.
Does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it? Saying is that we're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. And how does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it?
As a matter of the basic social science here, having kids does increase the likeliness that you will be conservative, for one. Also, being married and having children is not only healthy for a culture, but it's also very healthy for the economy. Having married parents increases the likeliness that you as a growing human will succeed in life. That's one of the most essential elements, is to live in a household where your parents are married. These are all basic things. Healthy, functioning families are very good for society. And voters who have children make decisions about the future that are very focused on, is there going to be a country for my descendants? That's a critical element. Now, is that to say that someone who doesn't have a kid is going to always make bad decisions? No, not at all. Lots of people don't have kids who make tremendous decisions. They're great voters. But if you just look, I guarantee you on all the issues that you and I care about, if you just look at it, by and large, the people who are the most enthusiastic in favor of getting things on the right track are parents. They want their kids to have a future here in this country where they do better than they did, than their parents did. That's a very simple formula. It's why I like when I see parents run for school board, because it's good to have someone who's on the school board who has some sense of what's right for the kids because they have a vested interest. It matters. So the left is acting like this is a scandalous clip, that JD Vance pointing out that that childless, what is the phrase? Childless cat ladies are dictating too much of the chaos that we see going on in this country. He's right about that. He's right about that. And we need less of that. We really do. Now, that said, there's another video going around now. And it's from a speech that JD Vance gave in 2021 to the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, great organization. And here is the snippet that's being shared. And in it, JD Vance talks about how people who have children should be able to actually get to cast bonus votes because they've got kids, so that those votes represent the interests of those humans as designated by their parents, who, of course, have custody of their kids.
Let's give votes to all children in this country, but let's give control over those votes to the parents of those children.
Now, this is, by the way, this is a wonderful idea. I love this idea. It's an idea. I've had this idea independently. I didn't realize JD Vance had talked about it in 2021. I think he predated my awareness, my decision to embrace it, because I think it's kind of great. Yeah, is it a new and different way to think of things? For sure, definitely. But I think it'd be neat. You know, if you've got a couple of kids, you get some bonus votes, or you can split them up between the husband and the wife. That's fine. Just count their vote as 1.5 votes. You got one kid, each person gets 1.5 votes.
When you go to the polls in this country as a parent, you should have more power, you should have more of an ability to speak your voice in our democratic republic than people who don't have kids. Let's face the consequences and the reality. If you don't have as much of an investment in the future of this country, maybe you shouldn't get nearly the same voice. Now,
okay, so he's quite obviously tapping into something very true. But this video is being shared. What I just played for you, that's the entirety of what's being shared. And now JD Vance is being attacked for this. How dare you? And there's a lot of people going after him saying, well, not everyone can have kids. There are people who are biologically have trouble having children. They're trying to have kids. They've been working at it. They've been praying at it, but they haven't been able to succeed. And you're being very insulting to those people. That's the reaction to this. Now, as usual, when you see these stupid viral things running all over the place, there's usually more to the story than they're letting on. And in this case, once again, that is the case. Caroline Leavitt over at the Trump campaign had to do the hard work of going and finding the original video, and she pulled the other element of JD Vance's speech that is not being shared anywhere except for now on Caroline's Twitter account.
Now let me do the necessary throat clearing, because I do think it's important. Look, a lot of people are unable to have kids for very complicated and important reasons. I know good friends of mine who have struggled to find the right girl, find the right guy. There are people, of course, for biological reasons, medical reasons, that can't have children. The target of these remarks is not them. It's important to point that out. There have always been people like that who, even though they would like to have kids, unable to have them. Let's set them to the side.
Yeah, okay. So, fair? I mean, so that, of course, is not being shared at all, that element of this speech. But the core point that JD Vance is making is a wonderful point. And whether you believe that people that should be extra enfranchised should have their kids represented in the vote by virtue of them going into the ballot box and making votes on behalf of those human beings, you may not agree. But regardless, it's not up for debate that families are good for healthy societies. I mean, heck, the entire point of humanity is to sustain itself, And then if you have kids and if you have grandchildren and great-grandchildren, that increases the obvious level of concern you have about the future of this country and that it'll exist. One of the things that drives me crazy about polling, you ever look into crosstabs inside of a poll? There's lots of things you can find out. You can find out what somebody's general age is. You can find out what the young people voted for, the middle-aged people, the older people, what they voted for. You can find out income levels, poor people, middle-income people, rich people. Who did they vote for? What do they prefer in this election? Sentiments, candidates. Race is one of the priorities of pollsters. You get indications black, you get Hispanic, you get white, you get everything. Why don't we ever get, on a routine basis, do you have children? Seems to me that's way more important than whether or not you're black or you're Hispanic. Do you have kids is an essential barometer that should be detected in every poll. They should ask people, as they're asking them these poll questions, are you a parent? Do you have children? Because that will help you understand, well, this is what parents want for the country. We have all these debates about what parents want. Why don't we ask people if they're actually parents as we ask these questions about their political views? Seems pretty important to me. And if more people were parents, let's say, I actually think that this is one of the many problems that come with population collapse. We're not even having enough kids to replace ourselves right now. If more people are parents, the outcomes are going to be better for our country. Guaranteed. That's not a matter of what radio show you listen to, what newspaper you read, what cable channel you watch. Having a child forces you into a position where you have to assess, first of all, what's good for them and what kind of world you'd like to leave them. It forces you to confront it. In my life, having a kid was huge because, just in terms of my relationship with everything, my whole world became very focused. It became very focused. My relationship with the church, my relationship with God, all of it comes back into focus because when you have a kid, you have to assess, okay, what kind of moral code am I leaving this child with? What do I teach them? How do I live my life so I'm not being a hypocrite in front of them? I don't want to act in such a way that I'm violating the very things that I'm telling them they should do. It focuses you. It makes you better. If you do it the right way, if you're healthy about it, it makes you better. And so as a result, this whole thing, it's the most ridiculous scandal. They're attacking JD Vance for saying kids are a net positive for society and that parents have a longer term view on average. Now, again, this is not saying that there aren't people who don't have kids who don't have a long term view. They do. But parents on average have a longer term view because they actually have a stake in what this country looks like far into the future. All right. Your calls, as always, at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Nick in Purcellville calling in now, line one. Nick, good afternoon. So you're on the Vince Gallahney Show.
Hey, Vince. I don't have any kids, and I was married 10 years, and I decided not to have children. But I have to dispute the premise that people that don't have children are somehow not a positive as effect on society as those that do and aren't contributing as much. A lot of times you'll see someone that's in politics and they do have a family that they'll bail out of their job, and use their family as an excuse. And I think it's kind of the whole conceptual thing about it is that you're not as beneficial to society as someone that does have children. And it's kind of like blaming the spread of COVID on the unvaccinated to me.
Yeah, but the key, I'm right there with you, Nick. I understand the point you're making. And you're right. There are people who have families who are lousy people. They're just lousy people who are actually on net not improving society. Like, let's say Joe Biden. That's a great example of what you're talking about. You're totally right about that. But, Nick, we're talking about, in a broad sense, we're talking about on average. And the social science on this is crystal clear. It's not even actually in any way up for dispute. The kind of country you would prefer to live in is one with lots of flourishing families.
Yeah, well, I kind of look at it as handing the world off to, my brothers and sisters, kids.
Exactly.
I kind of look at it like that's my extended family.
Yeah.
And not so much my dog or cat that I've lived with.
Although the animals are great, though. I'm not slighting anybody who's got an animal. I love the animals.
But I have a big scar on my nose from a pet bird, so.
Oh, do you?
I kind of have a different.
Well, you have a different relationship with birds. That's well earned. Nick, thank you. I appreciate the call.
You're welcome.
That's a good call as always from Nick. Let's see here. Sam calling in from Alexandria, now line 2. Sam, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, brother. It's so good to talk to you, and thanks for putting me on. You and I agree on so much. It pains me to no end to say this is so flawed. This is so flawed.
What's flawed?
Because, the whole premise of people with kids getting extra votes. Number one, we have a big enough issue with how voting occurs now, simply one-to-one voting. But I think even more so because we are also very well aware it's not a slam on ladies, but by and large, ladies that are mothers tend to vote liberal because they are, and I know it's stereotypical, but I think it bears out in data, because they are looking for the quote-unquote protective aspect of politics. And that's where I stand on is I understand. I think I know where you're coming from in the big hand wave, conceptual, theoretical realm. More families are better. Got it. But there's so many dynamics to it.
No, I agree. You're right about. I mean, look, Thomas Sowell said pretty famously that there are no solutions, only trade-offs when it comes to public policy. So nothing is ever very clean as you try and fix all of this. You're right, and this is conceptual, and there's no doubt this would be a very messy thing to actually turn into a real public policy. And there's a number of reasons for that. One of them is single parents. What do we do with single parents? What do we do with parents who have a custody issue where kids live with one parent and not the other? You're right. There's a lot of mess associated with the concept, but the concept, insofar as we discuss it, points to a truism, which is that what we really want is to have a world where we enable parents, people with long-term views about this country, to be put in the best positions to make wise decisions about what comes next.
Yeah, I totally understand, get, and appreciate, and agree with that. The other side of that is remember that when we first started, who was allowed to vote? Property owners. Why was that? Because they had a vested interest in how things went forward. And pardon me, I don't know my history well enough to where that went to the wayside. But I think by and large, if we can just get in control who votes once for their candidate of choice, I would be doing cheetah flips and happy as could be.
And also, this is not about disenfranchising a single person. This is about enfranchising every human that lives in this country, every American citizen specifically who lives in this country. And that's what this concept really is about. Sam, thank you.
Okay, well, here, let me throw this one right back at you real fast.
Please, go for it.
How do you feel about those municipalities that are now wanting to allow 16-year-olds to vote?
Their parents should do it for them.
Them.
Their parents should do it for them. If you're going to do that, that's the way we do it. Thank you, Sam. I appreciate that.
Well, as far as ideas that to expand the electorate, voting, allowing that to parents, people who, as you said, voted for the future, is a lot better idea than, let's say, convicted felons, felons still in jail or prison, or even people still in jail.
Yeah.
Democrats always want to add those.
Yeah, that's right. No, you're right about that. The left's position is let's let the criminals and the illegal foreign nationals influence how we run our government. The right's position is, hey, how can we make sure kids are well represented? Parents, healthy American families. We are not the same. These are two very different parties. Stay with us. Derek Anderson joins us next.